And speaking of the Mushy Center, this is where we're going to start. And I think you can replace Mushy Center with Active Directory, because really we all have Active Directory based environments. If you're using something that's based on the NIST cybersecurity framework, there's a good chance that your network looks like what we're going to describe here. Now, when you first started out, you probably had everything in one big blob of a network, which is why we usually have our user desktops in with our servers. And even when you do get big enough to need to do some type of segmentation, we actually kind of implicitly define production as anything that's not in dev and test. And then anything that remains within production, we actually separate with ACLs. If you are a very highly regulated organization or very security conscious, there's a good chance you're also trying to control the traffic between these users and administrators and the servers on the back end. And most people are actually doing this through some type of bastion host or a PAM solution that allows people to use remote desktop access to get to assets further into the environment. You may or may not be using a different identity to do it, and you may or may not be using 2FA here. However, the actual issue with doing this is that hackers are generally not going to be using remote desktop protocol. They're probably going to use one of these protocols listed here, which are native to all Windows devices now, and in many cases are absolutely necessary for you to actually have a functioning Active Directory environment. And also with the exception of SSH, and in some cases WinRM, when used with the Azure CLI, these things don't actually support 2FA. So with that being said, right here, usually when we're trying to describe what does your identity look like in this environment, what we're actually talking about is just a username and password. And if somebody has your username and password and they get onto a single host, they can generally move laterally between desktops and desktops to servers because we're not actually watching those vectors, or we can't outright block them. The same goes for the opposite direction too, where if someone's dropped onto a server, there's really nothing stopping them from moving from server to server, or in many cases, even server to desktop. Now, if we can't outright block this stuff, which again, that's a very difficult thing to do without breaking your environment, we want to be able to detect this type of lateral movement and be able to say that this is malicious. So what we're going to do next is actually walk through some rule building exercises. And we're going to start by determining what does lateral movement really look like? What type of artifacts does it leave behind? And then what kind of false positives would we run into if we built rules to actually detect this type of activity? But we do want to make sure that whatever we come up with scales, because again, a single rule that one person could use while threat hunting does not necessarily translate to a repeatable process that works across thousands of computers 24/7. So whatever we come up with has to be general enough that it's not going to require a monthly signature update. We don't have to have specialized knowledge of dynamic infrastructure changes. And I'm also going to say we're going to use only Windows events. I know like Sysmon's a fantastic tool. We have EDRs, we have all sorts of things out there for increasing our visibility into this space. But in the words of a friend of mine who actually ended up dealing with the SolarWinds situation, he told me we couldn't install EDR or AV on our SolarWinds server because of the threat that it could actually impact a production system we really needed. So it's, I don't think, a valid assumption to say that we're going to have perfect visibility everywhere, or that just because we're the security team that we get to dictate where security tools go.